The man on the station bench had stopped shaking, and that was how Eleanor Whitmore knew he was close to death. Snow swept across the wooden platform in hard white waves, covering his boots, his coat, and the old hat hanging low over his face. The winter storm had trapped 2 trains outside Helena, Montana territory, and even the station workers had gone inside to escape the bitter wind. No one had noticed the stranger sitting alone beneath the broken station lamp. No one except Eleanor. She had come to the station that evening because a crate of medicine was supposed to arrive for the families living near her boarding house. Instead, she found a freezing man holding one hand tightly against his chest, as though the last thing he owned was hidden inside his coat. Eleanor lifted her lantern and stepped closer. She was 39, wealthy, widowed, and known throughout Helena for owning the finest lodging house near the railroad. Her deep green wool coat was made in New York, and the silver clasp at her throat was worth more than the stranger's entire clothing. But when she saw his pale face, she did not think about money or class. "Sir," she called, "can you hear me?" The man did not answer. Eleanor placed the lantern beside the bench and touched his shoulder. His coat was stiff with ice. "Wake up," she said firmly. "You cannot sleep here." His head moved slowly. He opened his eyes, but they seemed unable to focus. His beard was covered with frost, and his lips had lost their color. "I am not sleeping," he whispered. "You are freezing." He looked toward the dark railway tracks. "It does not matter." Eleanor felt something tighten inside her chest. She had heard those words before. Her husband, Charles, had spoken in the same empty way during the final week of his illness. He had died 4 years earlier, leaving Eleanor with a large house, several investments, and more loneliness than she knew how to carry. "It matters to me," she said. The stranger gave a weak, bitter laugh. "You do not know me." "No, but I know what happens when a man stops shaking in weather like this." She reached for his arm and tried to pull him up. He was taller and heavier than she expected, though hunger had made him thin. For 1 second he stood, then his knees gave way. Eleanor caught the front of his coat before he fell from the platform. "Help," she shouted toward the station. A young porter named Daniel rushed through the door. Together, he and Eleanor lifted the stranger between them. The man tried to protest, but his voice was too weak. "My house is 3 streets away," Eleanor told Daniel. "We are taking him there." "Mrs. Whitmore, the storm is getting worse." "Then we must move faster." They stepped into the white darkness. The wind pushed against them so hard that Eleanor could barely see the next building. The stranger's boots dragged through the snow. Twice he nearly collapsed. "Stay awake," Eleanor ordered. He raised his head slightly. "Why?" "Because I did not ruin my best coat dragging you from that bench just to let you die in the street." Something changed in his eyes. It was not a smile, but it was close. They finally reached Whitmore House, a tall brick building with warm yellow windows and a wide front porch. Eleanor pushed through the heavy doors with snow covering her hair and shoulders. The lobby was filled with wealthy travelers waiting for the storm to pass. Men sat near the fire smoking cigars. Women in fine dresses drank tea beneath crystal lamps. Every head turned when Eleanor entered with the frozen stranger leaning against her. A woman near the stairs pulled back in disgust. "Who is that?" "He will dirty the carpet," another guest whispered. Eleanor gave them a cold look. "Then the carpet will be cleaned." She turned to her housekeeper, Ruth Parker. "Prepare the kitchen. Bring warm blankets, broth, and dry cloths." Ruth looked at the stranger's frozen face and hurried away without question. They laid him on a thick rug several feet from the kitchen fire. Eleanor knew he could not be placed too close to the heat. She removed his wet coat and found that his shirt beneath it was thin and torn. His hands were covered with cuts, and his boots were frozen solid. For nearly 2 hours, Eleanor and Ruth worked to warm him slowly. They wrapped his feet in warm cloths and covered him with heavy blankets. The stranger groaned as feeling returned to his fingers. "That pain means you are still alive," Eleanor told him. He opened his eyes. "I am not sure that is a blessing." Eleanor looked at him carefully. "You have someone waiting for you." His expression changed. His right hand moved toward the inside of his coat, which lay beside the fire. Eleanor noticed the movement and reached into the pocket. She pulled out a small wooden bird. It was a simple carving, unfinished along one wing. A name had been cut into the bottom. Emma. The stranger tried to sit up, give it back. Eleanor placed the wooden bird in his hand. Who is Emma? He stared at the carving for a long moment. My daughter. How old is she? 6. Where is she? With my brother in Idaho. His voice broke on the last word. Eleanor sat beside him. What is your name? Jacob Reed. And why are you freezing alone at a railway station, Mr. Reed? He closed his fingers around the wooden bird. Because I failed her. Jacob told Eleanor that he had once owned a small cattle ranch near Willow Creek. His wife, Margaret, had died from fever 2 winters earlier. After her death, Jacob raised Emma alone, but the worst winter in years killed most of his cattle. The bank took the ranch, his horses, and nearly everything else. He sent Emma to stay with his older brother, promising he would find work and bring her home before spring. The wooden bird was meant to be her gift. She asked me to finish it before I came back, Jacob said. I thought I would find work in Helena. Instead, the railroad camp closed, and every ranch nearby had more men than it needed. He looked toward the fire. I spent my last dollar on bread 3 days ago. Eleanor studied the broken man beneath the blankets. His pride was wounded but not dead. She could see it in the way he avoided her eyes. You will stay here until you recover, she said. Jacob shook his head. I cannot pay. You can work. His eyes lifted. There are chairs that need repairing, wood that needs cutting, and a stable door that has been broken since October. He knew she was offering him mercy disguised as employment. Still, he nodded. I can do those things. During the next 2 weeks, Jacob slowly regained his strength. He walked with a limp because 2 toes had been badly injured by the cold, but every morning he rose before sunrise. He repaired tables, fixed loose boards, carried coal, and cleaned the snow from the front steps. The guests continued to whisper. Some called him Eleanor's beggar. Others claimed she had lost her mind after years of living alone. Eleanor ignored them. She began noticing small things about Jacob. He always gave the kitchen dog part of his breakfast. He fixed Ruth's broken cupboard without being asked. He carved the wooden bird each night beneath the kitchen lamp, adding one careful line at a time. Jacob also noticed things about Eleanor. She checked every guest room before sleeping. She kept her late husband's chair near the office window. She often poured 2 cups of coffee in the morning, then quietly returned 1 cup to the shelf. One evening, Jacob found her alone in the office with several papers spread across the desk. Her face was pale. What happened? He asked. Eleanor tried to cover the papers, but he had already seen the bank seal. The Whitmore house is in trouble, she admitted. The storm stopped the trains. Most guests will leave as soon as the tracks open, and several suppliers are demanding payment. How much do you owe? $300 by Monday. Jacob went still. $300 was more money than he had seen in years. If you cannot pay, the bank will take the house. Jacob looked around the office. He saw the shelves Eleanor dusted every morning, the guest books filled with years of names, and the chair where she still imagined her husband sitting. You saved this place after your husband died, he said. I tried. No, you did. Eleanor looked down at the papers. Trying may not be enough this time. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Jacob stood in the dark hallway holding the unfinished wooden bird. He stared at Eleanor's closed office door and remembered something he had spent 11 years trying to forget. A hidden canyon. A dead partner. A leather bag buried beneath a burned pine tree. Before sunrise, Jacob packed bread, a blanket, and an old map. He left no explanation. He only placed the wooden bird on his bed. When Eleanor entered his room that morning, she found it empty. Outside, fresh wagon tracks disappeared west into the storm. And beside the wooden bird was a short note written in Jacob's rough hand. You gave me one more chance. Now I must give you yours. Eleanor read Jacob's note 3 times before the meaning settled inside her. He had gone into the storm alone. She stood beside the empty bed, holding the wooden bird in one hand and the note in the other. The room still carried the faint smell of leather, pine, and the cold air that had entered when he opened the window. His blanket had been folded carefully. His boots were gone. So was the old map from the office drawer. Ruth appeared in the doorway and saw Eleanor's face. "He left." Eleanor nodded. "Did he say where?" "No." She looked down at the unfinished bird. "But he went because of me." By noon, everyone in Whitmore House knew Jacob Reed had disappeared. The guests had their own ideas. Some said he had stolen silver. Others said he had used Eleanor's kindness and run when the chance came. Eleanor did not believe any of it. She searched his room again and found nothing missing except a little food, a blanket, and the map. No money had been taken. No silver was gone. Even the warm coat she had given him still hung behind the door. He had left wearing his old one. That frightened her more than any rumor. Jacob was heading west toward the mountains. The storm grew worse before sunset. Snow covered the streets and closed the road beyond town. Eleanor went to the sheriff's office and asked for help. Sheriff Nathan Cole listened quietly while she explained. "A man traveling alone in this weather will not last long," Eleanor said. Nathan looked through the window at the blowing snow. "No search party can leave tonight. The road is gone. Then send riders at first light. If the wind drops..." Eleanor's hands tightened around the wooden bird. "He saved my house before he even knew if he could save himself." Nathan studied her face. "You care for him." Eleanor looked away. "I owe him." "That is not what I asked." She did not answer. The next morning, the storm continued. The day after that, the road remained buried. Eleanor waited beside the front window from dawn until darkness. Every time a wagon moved through the street, she stood. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped. Jacob did not return. On the third night, Eleanor sat alone near the kitchen fire. The wooden bird rested in her lap. She ran one finger over the unfinished wing and thought about Emma, the little girl waiting in Idaho. "You promised her," Eleanor whispered. "Do not make me tell her you never came back." Far west of Helena, Jacob was fighting to stay alive. He had joined a supply wagon before dawn, riding with 2 miners toward an abandoned camp near Bear Ridge. The wagon carried tools and food for a small crew repairing a damaged bridge. Jacob told the driver he was looking for work. That was only part of the truth. 11 years earlier, Jacob and his closest friend, Samuel Grant, had found gold in a narrow canyon beyond the ridge. They were young then, full of hope and certain they would become rich. They filled a leather bag with small nuggets and old coins they had earned from earlier work. Before they could return to town, Samuel fell from a steep trail and died. Jacob buried his friend beneath a burned pine tree. He also buried the gold. After that, he never went back. The place held too much pain. The gold felt cursed because Samuel had never lived to share it. Jacob built a ranch instead and tried to forget the canyon. Now Eleanor was about to lose everything. That gave him a reason to return. The supply wagon carried him as far as the bridge camp. From there, Jacob walked alone. His injured foot burned with every step. Snow filled the old trail and the wind erased his tracks behind him. He reached Bear Ridge near sunset. The canyon below looked darker and narrower than he remembered. Dead trees stood beneath the snow like broken fingers. Jacob found the burned pine just before nightfall. He dropped to his knees and began digging. The ground was frozen hard. His fingers quickly became numb. He used a small iron tool from his pack and struck the earth again and again. Hours passed. His hands split and bled beneath his gloves. At last, the tool struck something soft. Leather. Jacob pulled the old bag from the frozen ground. The straps were nearly rotten, but the gold remained inside. For a long moment, he sat in the snow beside Samuel's grave. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I thought leaving it here would honor you." The wind moved through the trees. Jacob looked at the bag. "But she gave me back my life. I cannot let them take hers." He covered the grave again, then began the long journey back. The storm trapped him overnight in an abandoned hunter's cabin. The roof leaked snow, and there was no firewood. Jacob wrapped himself in the blanket and held the bag against his chest. He thought about Eleanor sitting alone in the office. He thought about Emma waiting for the finished bird. He refused to close his eyes. By the 5th day, Eleanor had lost hope. The bank manager, George Holloway, arrived at Whitmore House with 2 papers and a hard smile. "The payment is due today," he said. Eleanor stood behind the office desk. "I need more time." "You have already had time. The railway has been closed." "That is not the bank's concern." George placed the papers before her. "Sign these and the transfer will be peaceful." Eleanor stared at the line where her name belonged. Whitmore House had been her husband's dream. After his death, it became the only thing that gave her a reason to wake each morning. She had cared for travelers, fed hungry families, and given work to people no one else wanted. Now she was about to lose it. She picked up the pen. At that moment, the front door slammed open. A blast of snow entered the lobby. Every guest turned. Jacob stood in the doorway. His coat was torn, ice covered his beard. A deep cut crossed his forehead and one hand was wrapped in dirty cloth. He looked ready to fall, but his eyes were clear. In both arms, he carried a heavy leather bag. "Jacob," Eleanor whispered. He walked toward the office. His steps were slow and uneven. The room fell silent as he placed the bag on the desk. It landed with a hard metallic sound. George Holloway stared at it. "What is that?" Jacob opened the bag. Gold nuggets and old coins shone beneath the office lamp. Gasps moved through the lobby. "This should cover the debt," Jacob said. George reached inside and lifted one nugget. "Where did you steal this?" Jacob's expression changed. "I did not steal it. You expect me to believe a penniless drifter found a bag of gold in a snowstorm." Jacob pulled a folded paper from his coat. It was old, stained, and nearly torn in half. "This is an assay record from 11 years ago. It carries my name and Samuel Grant's name." George read the paper twice. Jacob continued. "We found the gold near Bear Ridge. Samuel died before we could return. I buried it beside him." The bank manager looked suspicious, but the document carried an official stamp. Sheriff Nathan Cole stepped into the lobby. He had arrived after hearing Jacob had returned. "I will verify the record," Nathan said. "Until then, the gold remains here." George looked angry, but he could not refuse. Eleanor moved around the desk. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Jacob looked at her. "You saved me when everyone else walked past," he said. "I could not let them take your home." His knees suddenly gave way. Eleanor caught him before he hit the floor. She held him tightly as the guests watched. "You foolish man," she whispered through tears. "You could have died." Jacob leaned against her shoulder. "I almost did." Eleanor pulled back and looked into his tired eyes. "You are never doing something like that alone again." A weak smile touched his face. "Does that mean I can stay?" Her voice broke. "It means you must." For the next week, Jacob remained in bed with fever. Eleanor sat beside him every night. She changed the cloth on his forehead and read letters aloud when he could not sleep. One evening, Jacob opened his eyes and found her holding the wooden bird. "You kept it," he said. "You left it behind." "I was afraid I would lose it in the storm." Eleanor placed it in his hand. "You still have a promise to finish." Jacob looked at the unfinished wing. "So do you." "What promise?" "You promised Emma she would have her father again." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Then we will send for her as soon as you are strong." Jacob stared at her. "We." "Yes," Eleanor said softly, "we." Before either of them could say more, loud voices came from the lobby. Sheriff Nathan entered the room with a serious expression. "The assay record is real," he said. "The gold belongs to Jacob." Eleanor smiled with relief, but Nathan did not. "There is another problem." Jacob pushed himself higher against the pillows. "What happened?" Nathan looked toward the door. "Someone in town claims Samuel Grant was murdered." The room became still. "And they are accusing you." Jacob looked at Sheriff Nathan as though the fever had suddenly returned. "Who made that claim?" he asked. Nathan stepped aside. A broad man in a black coat entered the room. His name was Martin Crow, a wealthy land dealer who had been trying to buy Whitmore House for years. He had smiled when Eleanor struggled with the bank, and he had been angry when Jacob returned with enough gold to save her. "Samuel Grant was my cousin," Martin said. "My family always believed Jacob Reed killed him and took the gold." Eleanor stood between Martin and the bed. "Jacob nearly died bringing that money back," she said. "He did not steal it." Martin gave her a cold smile. "You know him for a few weeks. I knew what people said 11 years ago." Jacob pushed the blankets aside and tried to stand. His legs shook, but he refused to remain lying down while another man called him a murderer. "Samuel was my friend," Jacob said, "closer than a brother." "Then why did you never report his death?" Jacob's face tightened. "Because I was young, frightened, and alone. We were far from town. I buried him where he fell and walked away from everything." Martin turned to the sheriff. "A guilty man would say the same." Nathan lifted one hand. "Accusations are not proof, but the claim must be examined." He looked at Jacob. "When you are strong enough, you will take us to the grave." Eleanor stepped forward. "He cannot travel in his condition." Jacob touched her arm. "I have to go." "No. If I do not, Martin will poison every mind in Helena." Eleanor's eyes filled with fear. "You may not survive another trip." Jacob looked at her gently. "Then I will need someone beside me." 3 days later, the weather cleared. Jacob, Eleanor, Sheriff Nathan, Martin Crow, and 2 deputies left Helena in a covered wagon. Eleanor refused to stay behind. She packed blankets, food, medicine, and enough firewood for the journey. The road to Bear Ridge was slow and dangerous. Snow still covered much of the trail, and Jacob's injured foot caused him pain with every step. Eleanor stayed near him, helping him climb in and out of the wagon. On the second evening, they camped beneath a line of pine trees. Martin sat apart from the others, watching Jacob with open suspicion. Eleanor warmed coffee over the fire. She handed a cup to Jacob. "You should hate me for bringing this trouble to your door," he said. "I do not hate you. You lost guests because of me. You nearly lost your house. Now you are sleeping in the snow." Eleanor sat beside him. "Before you came, Whitmore House was full of people, but I was alone. I had money, rooms, and respect. None of it made me feel alive." Jacob watched the flames. "And now I am frightened every day." He looked at her in surprise. She smiled softly. "Because now I have something worth losing." Jacob reached for her hand. Eleanor allowed him to hold it. For the first time, neither of them hid what they felt. They reached the canyon the next afternoon. Jacob led them along the narrow creek bed until they found the burned pine. The grave lay beneath a deep layer of snow. Jacob knelt and began clearing it with his hands. The deputies helped him. After nearly an hour, they uncovered a line of stones and the remains of a wooden marker. The name Samuel Grant was still visible. Martin's face lost some of its confidence. Sheriff Nathan examined the ground. Near the grave, they found the hole where Jacob had removed the leather bag. The earth had been disturbed recently, but the stones around Samuel's resting place had not moved in years. One deputy found an old rusted knife beneath the snow. Samuel's initials were carved into the handle. Then Nathan noticed something near the edge of the ridge. A broken section of old rope was caught between 2 rocks. Jacob stared at it. "That was Samuel's climbing rope," he said. "It snapped when he fell." Nathan walked toward the steep drop. Below it, jagged stones covered the canyon floor. "The condition of the rope and the grave support Jacob's story," Nathan said. Martin remained silent. The sheriff turned toward him. "Your cousin died in an accident. There is no sign of murder." Martin's jaw tightened. "You cannot know that after 11 years. Nathan looked him directly in the eye. I know you made a serious accusation without evidence. Martin glanced at Eleanor. This is not over. Yes, it is, she said. You wanted my house. You thought destroying Jacob would make me weak enough to sell. Martin did not answer. That silence told everyone the truth. When they returned to Helena, Sheriff Nathan posted a public notice outside his office. It confirmed Jacob's ownership of the gold and cleared him of any connection to Samuel's death. The town's gossip slowly changed. The people who had once called Jacob a criminal now called him brave. Some even came to Whitmore House to apologize. Jacob accepted their words, but he did not forget how quickly they had judged him. Eleanor did not care whether they apologized. Her attention was on the letter arriving from Idaho. Jacob's brother had agreed to bring Emma to Helena. For the next 2 weeks, Jacob finished the wooden bird. He carved the final wing, polished the small body, and painted a tiny red mark across its chest. On the morning the train arrived, Jacob stood on the station platform wearing a clean brown coat. His cane rested in one hand. The wooden bird rested in the other. Eleanor stood beside him in her deep green coat. The train entered the station with a long whistle. Steam filled the platform. A small girl stepped down from one of the passenger cars. She had dark curls, bright brown eyes, and a worn blue bag in her hand. She saw Jacob and stopped. For one terrible second, she did not move. Then she dropped the bag. Papa. Jacob lowered himself to one knee. Emma ran into his arms with such force that he nearly fell backward. He held her tightly, closing his eyes as tears moved down his face. You came back, she cried. I told you I would. It took so long. I know. He pulled the wooden bird from his coat. I finished it. Emma held the carving in both hands. She studied the smooth wings and the little red mark. Then she looked at Eleanor. Who is she? Jacob turned. This is Mrs. Whitmore. She saved my life. Emma walked toward Eleanor. Did you find him in the snow? Yes. Did he try to say he did not need help? Eleanor smiled. He did. Emma shook her head. He always does that. Jacob laughed for the first time in many days. Emma looked back at Eleanor. Thank you for not listening to him. She reached out and took Eleanor's hand. That simple touch broke something open inside Eleanor. She knelt and embraced the little girl. Whitmore House changed after Emma arrived. The silent rooms became filled with footsteps and laughter. Emma followed Ruth through the kitchen, helped Jacob repair furniture, and sat beside Eleanor at the office desk, pretending to manage the guest book. The railroad workers began staying at the house. They respected Jacob, and they told others about the warm meals and fair prices. Soon the rooms were full again. Eleanor no longer poured 2 cups of coffee by mistake. She poured 3 on purpose, with warm milk for Emma. One spring evening, Jacob found Eleanor standing on the porch. The snow had melted, and small flowers were beginning to grow beside the steps. He stood beside her. I have no ranch, he said. I have no fine name or great fortune. Eleanor looked at him. You have courage, kindness, and a daughter who has taken over my entire house. Jacob smiled. I love you. The words were simple, but they carried every storm they had survived. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. Jacob took a small silver ring from his pocket. It was not expensive. He had bought it with money earned repairing the station roof. Will you let me stay beside you for every winter that comes? Eleanor held out her hand. Yes. They were married in the garden behind Whitmore House on a bright morning in June. Emma stood between them during the ceremony, holding the wooden bird against her chest. The entire town attended, including people who had once judged them. Sheriff Nathan gave Jacob away as a joke, and Ruth cried louder than anyone. Years passed. Jacob became a partner in Whitmore House. He repaired buildings across Helena and later bought a small piece of land beyond town. Eleanor continued helping travelers, widows, and workers who had nowhere else to go. They welcomed two orphaned boys into their home and raised them beside Emma. Every winter, on the first night of heavy snow, Jacob and Eleanor walked to the station bench where she had found him. They left a basket there with bread, a blanket, and a small wooden carving. Sometimes the basket disappeared before morning. They never asked who took it. People began telling the story of the rich widow who saved a freezing single father and the broken rancher who crossed a mountain to save her home. Their names were never printed in the great history books. But across the Montana frontier, travelers spoke of Whitmore House as a place where no hungry person was turned away and no freezing stranger was ignored. Years later, Emma told her children that the West was not built only by strong men, brave riders, or wealthy families. It was also built by lonely people who chose to care for one another. And that was how Eleanor Whitmore and Jacob Reed became part of frontier history.